Part 3 of our model is all about design, and this is a great time to introduce some accelerator principles alongside our design activities. So what we'll be doing today is weaving design and acceleration together right now. So when it comes to design, this is an area that's useful to sort of flip-flop between high-level view and the detail of execution, because we want a framework that really flows and sits at the right level, but it must be doable and it needs to be based in reality. So if you look at your workbook, you'll find the page is split into two columns. There's the overarching approach, and then there's the detail of the ecosystem. And even if you're not looking at the workbook right now, have that thought in mind that I'm working on my approach over here, but I'm also weaving in elements of the ecosystem to make sure that this is based in reality and I'm dealing with the details. So let's start with your approach. And the first thought is just to come really top level. What are your thoughts on an approach to achieve the outcomes and satisfy the requirements that we talked about earlier? And here you're going to want to refer back to your earlier work on those things. What are my key outcomes? What are the key requirements and the secret sauce? Okay, what are my thoughts, my initial thoughts here on an approach? And just grab a piece of paper and start to sketch a few ideas out. Now I want to think also about what tweaks might you make to your approach that really maximize your strengths and minimize your weaknesses. You're starting to sketch out some basic ideas around your approach, and you think about, well, where am I already good? What am I good at? What comes to me naturally? What's easy for me? And where do I maybe struggle a little bit and maybe either need to spend a little bit more time to account for that or find an alternative approach? And then finally, what about your approach will ensure this is achievable, sustainable, and will integrate with life? So maybe three key ideas there. First of all, sort of high-level thoughts on the approach. Secondly, tweaks to really play to strengths and downplay weaknesses. And thirdly, just to think about what's going to make this achievable, what's going to make this integrate with life. I don't want it to be a resistant thing. I want it to be something that's beautifully dovetailing into everything that I do day in, day out, week in, week out. Now, as you ask yourself these top-level approach questions and you start sketching out on a piece of paper, which is my preferred way to do it, maybe you want to do this on the computer, but I love to get pen and paper, a nice big sheet of A3 paper, and think, okay, what is my strategy here? I've got my outcomes, I've got my requirements, what's the approach? Now, as you ask yourself these top-level approach questions, it's a good time to introduce a few accelerator principles and start jotting those down to the side as you start to work your approach. And the first accelerator principle here is decisiveness. I'd love you to write that down in your notes. Decisiveness. We want to prefer timely, smaller decisions to belabored, larger decisions. And just have that as a rule. Always be on the lookout for indecision in yourself and look for the smaller decision in front of a bigger decision that's maybe got you blocked. Second key accelerator principle is prototyping. We want to be running mini experiments for real world feedback. Be constantly asking yourself, how could I experiment here? What would be a great experiment to give me some real world feedback? I don't want to just be in my head. I don't want to just be dreaming up, would I like this? Would it work? Is this a good thing? I want to find an experiment so I can really try it. A great example here is career shifting. Let's say I'm working with a client and they want to completely change careers. They're a corporate lawyer and now they're thinking about becoming a Reiki instructor alongside being a professional diver off the coast of Australia or something. They want to make a complete career shift. We've got two options here. We can sit and reflect and think, would that work for me? And am I okay with the change in lifestyle because it's going to have some pros and some cons? I can go through all of that, or I could try it. I could run a little experiment. I could go out there and try it for a few weeks, or even take a sabbatical for 6 months and really get the feedback. This is a great accelerator principle. We call it prototyping. Third key accelerator principle is tweaking. The idea of tweaking to perfection. And this is related to the ideas that we've already talked about. Being decisive, so looking for smaller decisions and getting going on things, and prototyping, running little experiments so we get real world feedback. We want to tweak our plan to perfection. There's no sense in getting it absolutely perfect on paper. It just won't survive contact with the enemy. I'm sure you've heard that. No plan survives contact with the enemy. As soon as I put it into the outer world and try to execute on that, I find out the rest of the world doesn't want to cooperate with me. Who'd have thought that? So I don't want to just stay in my head. Stay in your head, you're dead. Tweak the plan to perfection. Get it, just good enough and then be decisive, take action, get into some prototyping, run experiments, and tweak from there, and that will get you to the perfect plan. And our fourth key accelerator principle is gains and gaps. I want you to make a habit of journaling on your gains and then your gaps. So not one and discarding the other, to do both, but to start with the gain and then look at the gap. You're running a strategy, you're building your design, you're starting to run some experiments, you're starting to tweak your plan to perfection. Alongside that, I'd love you to journal on your gains, like what's going well, what's working, what am I pleased about, what am I proud of, what's the real learning that's been very valuable here. And from that really great high consciousness place that I'm now in, I want to think about some of the gaps. Okay, where have I got a knowledge gap? Where have I got a skill gap? Where am I maybe missing somebody in the team or in the network? Really super useful. So 4 accelerator principles to put alongside your approach sketch that you're coming up with. We want to be decisive. We want to be running little experiments. We want to be tweaking the plan to perfection. And we want to be journaling on the gains and then the gaps. Now, alongside all this high-level approach work, this is column 1 in our workbook or in your mind. If you're creating a little bit of a thought palace here, approach is over here. Alongside all of that, we want to be reflecting over here on the ecosystem. This is the context in which your project or your strategy lives. And the analogy I love to share with people here is you can't make a plant grow, but you can give it the environment in which it has the best chance to flourish. Your projects, your goals, your strategies are very similar. I can't make them be successful, but I can create an environment in which they have the best chance. Why can't I make them be successful directly? Well, because there's the outside world. We've got customers, competition, we've got stakeholders. There's all sorts of outside influence on, in particular, our final goals, especially in the workspace. So we really want to think about the ecosystem that will give it the best chance of being successful. So a great question to ask here is, what would set me up for success here? I've got this strategy I'm building. What's going to set me up for success? And I want to give you maybe 6 areas to really think around. So I'll give you the list of 6, and then we'll delve into the detail. So data and input, stakeholders, resources, environment, risk, and review. So when we think about the ecosystem, we've got our project or our goal. Put something in your mind right now, something you want to work on, something you want to bring some strategy to. Now let's think about the ecosystem for that. So first of all, what's the data or the input that you need? What inputs are going to be required? Maybe you need decisions from certain people. Maybe there's some research you need to do. Maybe there's some data and some numbers that you need to crunch so you're armed with the information that you need. So this is the first key area, is to be thinking all the time, what's the data and input that I need? And you'll notice in the workbook, we have these 2 things side by side, because what I find is I'll be sketching out of an approach. I'll be thinking about little experiments I can run. And then it'll occur to me, there's a bit of data I need here. Or there's some input that I need from somebody who's done this before. So over on the right-hand side of my big sketch, under data and input, I note down what's needed to give me that input that I'm going to require, that's going to really inform the next steps of that little experiment I'm going to run, or that element of the approach. Second area I mentioned inside the ecosystem is stakeholders. Who else is involved? I just mentioned, maybe there's someone I need a decision from, but I also maybe need some support from people. Maybe there's a team I'm going to put around myself. Maybe there's some collaborators. So who else is involved in this project? And keep that running, that running list to the side. You're going to be thinking, as you go through your strategy and your approach, you're going to be thinking, I need this kind of person. Or I'd love to talk to that guy who's, I already know he'd be great for this. Or, she's going to be the person that I need at this stage of the project. I jot her name down and remind myself to make a phone call into that person, see if she's available. So who are the stakeholders? Who else is involved in your strategy? Third key area, resources. What's needed to be successful? Money is an obvious one. But we need other things as well. We're going to need some time, which is a key resource we never want to forget. We're going to have to carve out time for this project. Maybe there's certain tools that I need. Maybe there's certain systems that I need to put in place. So what are some of the resources that are going to be needed here? And related to that is the environment, the setup and systems that are going to be needed around me to really make this thing come to life. There's going to be certain aspects of my environment currently that are not tailored to frictionless moving into this project, this strategy, and getting things going. There's going to be elements of my environment right now which are really going to hamper me moving forward. There's going to be elements of my environment where stuff's missing that I need. There's going to be systems that aren't yet in place. So be running a list of setup and systems that are going to be required to really make this strategy be successful. Fifth area inside our ecosystem is risk. What are the risks, and therefore what are the risk mitigations? As you step through your approach, some elements are going to be that you might actually get stalled on this, thinking, oh, I'm not sure if that's going to work, and that's risky, and I'm not sure I'm willing to make that kind of investment of time or money or whatever the resource you're thinking needs to be plugged into this. Rather than get hampered and drop into a complete state of self-doubt and hesitation and not moving forward, keep a risk log running. That's a risk, that's a worry, that's maybe even an issue. A risk is something that might happen, an issue is something that already is happening. I want to get those jotted down and then move on in the strategy. I can come back to the risks and really get a view on, okay, what would it take to mitigate these risks? And then finally, review. Inside the ecosystem, how are we going to track? How are we going to trace? How are we going to tweak? We talked about the importance of tweaking to perfection. Well, I need to bake into my strategy an element of review. How am I going to get feedback? Is that just from me? Is it from the outside world? If so, who's that going to be? What's going to be valuable? What are the numbers that I want to track? What are the elements that I want to keep abreast of? What rhythm am I going to do? And how am I going to get those numbers? So really be thinking about your review, how you're going to track, trace, and tweak your strategy. So alongside your approach, let's summarize the ecosystem. Data and input, what inputs are going to be required, what information is needed, stakeholders, who else is involved, resources, what's needed to be successful here, my environment, the setup and systems that are going to help me to success, risk, what are my risks, what are the mitigations, and finally review, how am I going to bake in an element of tracking, tracing, and tweaking on my strategy. So it's high-level approach questions and thinking, then supported by some accelerator principles, then combined with detailed work on the ecosystem that gets us set up for success. And as per the workbook, it's very useful to flip-flop between both these worlds. There's some thinking on the approach that will inform the ecosystem. There's some ecosystem detail that will refine your thoughts on the approach. So keep moving back and forwards between those. Okay, now, final piece. We have our approach. We add the ecosystem, and that all gives us our initial action set. Now, we're not trying to cover everything here, every single action that's going to be needed. We're looking to get up and running. What's going to get the setup sorted? What's going to test my assumptions? How can I hit some quick wins? How can I get into momentum? That's the action set that we're looking for. And each and every time you run this process, you're going to be taking your foundations and requirements and creating an approach that'll generate your next action set that'll shift you to the next chapter in your strategy and in your journey. So there's the model in its entirety. Let's walk some case study examples right now. Okay, so to finish our session today, what I'd like to do is just step through a few case study examples to think about how we might use today's learning and the model that we've walked through and really apply it to some real world examples. I've got a few. I'm going to talk about promotion, shifting career, getting clients, developing certain skills, improving team morale and motivation. If you have something very specific you'd like to get some input on in terms of how you might apply some strategy, make sure you drop it in the notes in our session, in the session notes that are attached to this, and we'll see those. We'll maybe bring them into a future session, or we'll follow up on them individually. Okay, so the first idea I want to give you is let's think about winning promotion. Now, most people will talk a lot about wanting to get promoted, but they will not get strategic. And they'll wonder why every annual review they're just so disappointed and why they're not getting the promotion. They turn up and think they should be getting a promotion because of the time I've put in or some of the things that I've done. But when you stop and look, you think, oh man, I could have spent the whole year getting ready for this moment. I could have been strategic, and I've not done that. There's been like a hockey stick of activity in a couple of weeks before my annual review to think and scrabble around like, what have I done or what have I not done that I need to now go tick the boxes for? But imagine the day after your annual review and getting really strategic about, I'm going to spend the next year building an amazing portfolio that next year is going to blow my my team and everybody who knows me out of the water in terms of how great this is. So as we think about winning promotion and getting strategic, first thing we're going to do is follow our model and think about some of the outcomes. I know I'm looking for promotion, but let's get specific there. What is the promotion I'm actually looking for? What would be the benefits of that? And in particular, what's most important to me about this? And the values piece might play in a couple of ways. First of all, it might let me assess whether I really want this particular promotion or whether I want this one versus something else. That's really important. But I might also want to think about my values so that I can think about doing leadership my way, in a way that really aligns with my values. It's so often the case that people will see a leader in their world behaving in not a great way and then count themselves out of promotion because they think they need to behave that way in order to become a leader. That's just the way that person has done it. In fact, they've probably done it in spite of those difficult or not so great behaviors. So think about your values, and then that turns into how leadership is going to be done your way. It's also important then to spend a little bit of time with alignment. I mentioned earlier just now about, do I really want this promotion? Maybe I just think it's expected. Maybe it's just the natural next thing, and I'm not really giving it a lot of thought that, do I really want this? And is it worth the effort? I'm going to put in a bunch of time and effort and energy and attention into doing the kind of things that get me promoted. Is it worth it? Is it something that I really want? Now, if we start to move on in our strategy model, we'll come to requirements. And this is a great time to think, like, what's really required for promotion? It's so interesting to me that when somebody comes to me saying, well, I'm looking for promotion, and I say, okay, what's required for that? They have to stop and think. And what they notice in that moment, I mean, they've got the answers, but what they notice is they've not spent time with that question. It's like, that's a great question. What's actually required here to get promoted? And it's not going to be the same in every organization. So this is a great conversation to have with the boss. You might from there think a little bit about secret sauce. What's really going to make you stand out here? What is deeply valued in this particular organization or for this particular project that we're working on or the particular department that I'm in? And then when it comes to approach, I can really get into the ecosystem. It's super important when we're thinking about promotion. I mean, data and input. Yes, let's research what's needed, what other people have done, what's worked, what is valued. Let's build the right network around us. Think about the resources that probably translate to skills that you're going to need or certain people that you need in the network. And you'll want to review regularly, constantly journaling on the gains and the things that you're doing each week, each month, each quarter that's going to add up to an amazing annual review and promotion at the end of it. So there's an example of how we can shift from not being strategic to getting wholly focused on how we could create promotion, thinking about values, thinking about alignment, thinking about the requirements and having great conversations with our boss about what's really needed, thinking about what we can do to really stand out, really building an ecosystem that's going to support us. So that's an example around winning promotion. I hope that's going to serve you. Let's think about another example, somebody who's looking to shift careers. I mentioned just an arbitrary example earlier. You've got a corporate lawyer who now wants to teach Reiki alongside their secondary role as a diving instructor. They're going to do it off I said Australia earlier, maybe it wants to be the Caribbean. Now, most people, when they're thinking about shifting careers, they just go scroll the job boards and wait for inspiration to hit them between the eyes. They go onto all these different job listings and wait for something just to pop out. And when that doesn't happen for weeks on end, what do? They repeat that strategy and they do it again and again and wonder why it's not working. So let's get strategic here. First of all, let's think about some outcomes and in particular your values. So often when we're thinking about moving careers, we get stuck in specific industries or specific job titles. But I really want to get to the values. Super useful to get aligned and be thinking about, well, what's most important to me about a job? Because it'll open up new opportunities for you, new ideas you hadn't thought about. We want to feed all of those options of outcomes and values so we can be completely divorced from specific job titles. That's going to generate so many more options for me. When we get strategic around requirements and approach, we want strategy design to really help us highlight the power of, let's say, conversations when I'm thinking about shifting career, the kind of input that I'm going to need inside the ecosystem. How can I test assumptions? Also very useful to think about the risk of making a career shift and how we would hedge the downside. So here we're just using the same model, the same strategic thinking, but bringing it to a career shift and creating some structure. And it does a couple, three things for us. It generates new ideas and creates inspiration that we didn't have before. We get motivated. This is a project now that I'm really working on and wanting to move forward. And we get some real insight through testing assumptions, having conversations with people, having an approach that might be conversation plus a little bit of side hustle, plus a little bit of experimentation. Complete elevated game from just scrolling the job boards. Another example I'd love to give you is how to get clients. Let's imagine you're a consultant or a coach or an independent business owner and you have a service that you sell. Now, most people will just say, I don't know how to get clients, and they'll stop there. They'll ask themselves the question, how do I get clients? How do I get clients? How do I get clients? I don't know is the only answer that they come up with, and they stay stuck there. It's a very common space to be in, especially in my business as a coach. Now, this is a good example of the power of spending time in requirements. So when we start to work up our strategy, I want to spend some good time in the requirements here because it's not just clients, plural, that I'm looking for. It's a very specific type of client. So ask yourself, what's the type of client I'd love to work with? What's the actual requirement here? Clients, plural, or is it 10 clients or 5 clients? I just need 5 clients to fill my consulting business book. And I want those clients to be of a very certain caliber and get super specific. It's a great example of spending good time in the requirements, not just assuming that, well, I know what it is, and so I'm just going to stay with my unhelpful question of, I don't know how to get clients. You might also want to spend some time with this particular example thinking about the secret sauce. You want to be super specific in your niche, maybe. Or there's a skill set or a specialism that's very rare in the space that you're now focusing on. That can be your secret sauce. And then from there, you can think, okay, what would I need to do to create an unfair advantage in this particular area? And then with the ecosystem around winning client work, it's really useful to break down an approach and give it some structure. Now, like I've said, most people just sit with the question, how do I do this? And they stay stuck. And what we want to do is we want to get strategic and create an environment that includes tracking and review, which is super important here. Thinking about data and input, thinking about stakeholders and building the network, getting some structure and some ecosystem in and around what we're trying to do in terms of building a client list. So I hope that example will be useful for you. One more, maybe 2 more examples. So next example I want to give you is, let's say you're looking to build a skill. Let's say leadership skills. Now, most people just stay very generic. They think, oh yeah, I need to work on my leadership skills. They don't consider specifically what, and they don't consider specifically why. They wait for their boss, let's say, to offer a training course, or they buy a few books and those just sit on the shelves and they never actually read them. Or the HR at work just sends them on a particular course or decides that a particular line of professional development is going to be useful for the organization at this stage, and that's what we get. So it's very generic. It's not really targeted. It's not strategic. And I talked at the beginning about if we don't have a strategy, what we end up with is just a default strategy. It's just, you can never have no strategy. There's always going to be something there. It's just not intentional. And those unintentional default strategies, they're non-specific, they're reactive, and they're uncoordinated. They don't marshal everything together. Now let's contrast this about getting specific with, let's say, leadership skills. Because when we get strategic, we get specific about which leadership skills we need and why it's worth the investment of our time, energy, and focus. The ecology checks that we talked about, they sit nicely with our we can ask the question, does this sit nicely with our existing skill set? Does it preserve the existing benefits that we have? I can't and don't want to just bring in any old skill. I want to be very specific about where do I need to bolster my leadership toolkit. So we get really specific and really just complete those ecological checks to make sure everything balances. It's also a good time to really reflect on the secret sauce. What would give you an unfair advantage? You're thinking of developing some leadership skills. Maybe you've got your eye on a particular leadership position, or you've noticed inside the company you work at there's a gap there, or maybe inside the business that you're running you notice that you need something. What's the secret sauce? What's going to give you an unfair advantage? What's going to be the real competitive edge for you here? And just asking those good questions is going to give you some new ideas that you maybe hadn't thought of before. And then finally, you might think a little bit about getting really targeted in your reading list, creating an ecosystem that includes mentorship, ensuring that you've got the right data for your team, from your team to support the skills that you're looking to create. So once again, we're getting strategic, which helps us to get specific, introduce secret sauce, and build an ecosystem that's really going to help us develop this skill. And it'll help us develop it deeper, it'll last longer, the retention will be better, our mastery of that will be far better, and it'll just embed the learning, it'll be with us forever. So very worthwhile getting strategic. And as we've been talking about today, you can do that in just a few minutes with the right kind of model, the right kind of process. Okay, one more example, because I always love to talk about this. Improving team motivation. Now, many people, if you're running a team, when I've worked with clients who have got team leadership on their mind, they don't break it down. What they're focused on is just generically saying the team, the energy isn't kind of there. They can think of a particular person maybe whose energy isn't right, or maybe bringing the team down. Things feel heavy at the moment, things are moving slowly. And that's the kind of space we're in. And we're not really well equipped from that space to come up with some good ideas. Now let's get strategic about this. So let's spend some good time in alignment. That might be a really good outcome from getting strategic here. Thinking, okay, what are our values? What's my value as a leader? What's our value as a team? What are the company's values? And what are we doing to get really aligned with that? When we start then to think about requirements, we notice that it's not just generally team motivation, but it's other very specific elements of the team climate. Maybe it's a lack of clarity. Maybe there's not enough spirit type events that we're running. Maybe there's a sense of separation or isolation for some of the team. So can you see how when we start to dig into the requirements, it's not just blanket team motivation, but very specifically it's like, we've not done a lot on clarity. We've not done a lot on company values. We've not done a lot to build the spirit of the team. And these are now ideas that we can really focus on and take action around. Finally, we might want to build an approach inside our strategic thinking for team motivation that really considers all of the stakeholders, getting good clarity on the resources that are needed, and maybe some changes in the environment setup might be really useful. Going through our strategies and our strategy model might highlight and mitigate some of the key risks of not executing on this. Really important point. I want to spend good time on team climate and team spirit and motivation because I don't want to lose these good people. So that was an example that I hope will help you. And there we had 5 case studies just to get you thinking about how these ideas can be really applied in the real world. I hope that's going to be useful for you. And even though I've just given a quick high-level summary today, to go like full deep dive on this, you could very easily put, 30 minutes on the calendar maximum and work up a really good sketch strategy on any project you care to point your strategic thinking at. It's a little challenge I've got for you. Choose the biggest project, something that's the key worry that's on your mind, something you've always wanted to achieve, and spend no more 30 minutes on the strategy design accelerator. And I can near guarantee you're going to surprise yourself about how much clarity you get, how quickly you get it, and how much motivation you have to be ready to really move forward. And so to finish, what I'd like you to do is just think now of some opportunities that you can see to immediately apply what you've learned in our session today. Take a moment right now, think of where can I apply this? What can I point this at? Where do you see opportunity to get strategic in your learning and development, your key goals, your major projects? And from that, I'd love you just to reflect a little bit today on what's been the most valuable piece of learning that you'll want to bring into your life and your work. And what commitments are you making to yourself right now so far as being the kind of person who brings a high quality of strategic thought to their most important endeavors? I hope you found today's session useful and have got a sense of both competency and confidence when it comes to getting strategic on your key goals and your major projects. Please download the accompanying PDF and work through the process. Do that now and make a commitment to put these ideas into practice within the next 24 hours to really embed your learning and commitment for these great ideas. And don't forget to put any questions, comments, and hashtag wins in the chat roll below. We love to hear about those. Thank you as always for joining me today. I appreciate you hanging out with me and I look forward to seeing you in another session very soon. Bye for now.